said, university students are not foreign to me. I was teaching at the university for almost 27 years. So philosophy is my field. What I realize, a big limitation of university students is people are used to thinking in concepts. I had a recollection for engineering students, about 100 of them, and at the beginning of the recollection day, I was told by 90+%, we are not here out of our free will. We are here because we were sent by our teacher, because we are all atheists. So I asked them, what does it mean? What kind of God do you not believe in? What they did is they shared their images of God. And you can imagine that the images they shared have nothing to do whatsoever with the God that I believe in, the biblical God whose face we have seen in Jesus. So my first challenge for the students would be to reflect on their own images of God and to consider the image of God that Jesus is advertising in the Sermon on the Mount. The Catechism Pact invites us to go back to the essentials as we find them in the Word of God, namely meaning. So concretely for university students, this could mean look at your relationships. What does it exactly mean for you to have a friend? What does it exactly mean for you to love somebody? What does it exactly mean to be in love? How important are things for you? Are things more important than people? Are things more important than relationships? A relationship with deeper dimension allows us to do things that we cannot do ourselves, but it makes us different persons. You will see that if you have developed such a relationship, after you've checked your image, get rid of all the images that you have of this deeper dimension. God cannot be grasped in any image. The experience of God is an experience of meaning, an experience of love, an experience of joy, but also pain at times, and suffering. Having this deeper experience in life, you will become a different person. And this is what has happened to many people who have lived the Catacomb Pact. They have become different persons, different leaders, different professionals. And that is what I believe also important for university students who become engineers, who become medical doctors, who become lawyers, who become many other things. You will become different engineers, different medical doctors, if you have this deeper relationship to this deeper dimension of our existence of God. That will change you. In the life of our planet, the Pact challenges us to get involved and to ask basic questions. The basic questions: why are the poor poor? How do structures contribute to the sufferings of those at the margins? So that's a pact, I believe, that talks to everybody, independent of our faith, as well as independent of our beliefs. Whether you are non-believers, convinced atheists, convinced Christians, or Muslims or Hindus, or highly secularized people, what the Pact teaches us simply is to look at the given situation in which we are. Here we will find out that we cannot continue the way we are acting at this point in time. We have to introduce basic changes, and for that all people of goodwill, independent of their faith, will have to work together so that future generations will have life and that our planet will continue to have life. So in principle, what we need as human beings, we need places where we come together. And these places are usually very nice. So the nicer the place, the more we feel at home. This is also what we have in our church. We have a long history of people who met in special places to worship God, to be together, to meet, but also to celebrate their faith. For this we have all these beautiful churches. The beautiful churches talk about the faith of people of the past. So these churches are important as meeting places for us today, because they tell us about something that is important, that was important for previous generations. Today we realize, after the Second Vatican Council, which is the spirit of the Catacomb Pacts, that we emphasize church is not a building, it's not a meeting place. The meeting place is on top of our faith. Church, that's people, independent of where we are. As our missionaries very often do in many places around the world, we celebrate masses in basketball places, in football courts, in fishing villages without any church at all. But this is also church alive. I saw a picture of a group of confreres 20 years ago celebrating Mass in Africa under a tree with about 20 people. Today, the people themselves decided to have a beautiful meeting place, a church. Today, every weekend, there's more than 3,000 people meeting. So this is what we need, places where we feel at home. I guess every child will understand that if your home is very nice, you feel very much at home. It's easy to build relationships. You feel at home with your parents, with your brothers and sisters. So this is what we do in our churches. Beautiful buildings, beautifully decorated, very often reminding us of the belief and faith of previous generations. This is where we meet for worship. So these churches are important, it's meeting places. But we should never forget that the most important element is our own relationships, our own faith. This is what we want to celebrate. A poor church, can a poor church serve the poor? I think this is a very important question. Because we sometimes believe that the poor have nothing to give. And I believe this is a mistake. A poor person can give a lot. When I talk to children, I always share stories. I used to visit a simple woman, about 80 years old. She didn't know her age. She lived in front of an optical store in Cebu, in our neighborhood. I would pass by every evening. Every time I wanted to give her something, some food, she always refused. She said no. She was vending cigarettes and candies. That was her livelihood. Every time I left her, I was enriched, because what she shared was her happiness, her contentment, and her love. She was concerned. She was concerned about many things. So there are many, many poor who are very poor materially, but they have a lot to share. So that is why the vision of a poor church serving the poor, of the poor, is an important vision, because we need something that very often we have forgotten, namely what the poor can give. The poor can give a lot, and that is basically their friendship, their love, their concern. They can teach us something very important, namely that we cannot find ultimate happiness in things, although many of the poor really want exactly that. So in all honesty, we have to also say that. But my experience has been in Rome, for example, when we go to Caritas work with refugees, where these people who come for the meals in the evening really share during our conversations their contentment. Contentment with themselves, also their own happiness about their lives, their meaning in their lives, etc. So we do not want to glorify poverty. So we have to distinguish between poverty and the poor. The poor have a lot to give. That's the first message. Simplified to a small child, I would say, try to find out. The poor have a lot to give. So I do that always when I meet beggars, people sitting in front of churches, not only to give something, be it food or little money. I always make it a point to talk to the person. You will find out when you give a little, you will receive much more than what you gave. So I've experienced that every day in Rome when I encounter people here. You give a little, but what you get in return is much more. The poor have something to give, which is very important for all of us. So that would be the invitation for children. Try to find out what the poor can give. Yeah, it's a very special situation. You know, when you come to a very special place at a very special time, I'm sure you also as a child you experience that. You come to a special place at a special time. You go out at night, you see the stars, you see the moon, you see a very special environment, a beautiful forest, a beautiful place. This is what the bishops did. They were not sure how others would react, but they were so inspired that they could not stop doing what they were doing, to share their joy about the experience they had at the Second Vatican Council, during the meetings in the Vatican. So to come together in a special place to celebrate exactly that joy they had experienced. So for practical purposes, you cannot invite all the participants of this big meeting in the Vatican. So they met with 40 people who were really convinced and full of joy celebrating this experience. Later on, as we know, many others signed. They made sure, it's always, when you have great joy, you share that with others. This is what the 40 bishops did when they went back to the Vatican, continuing their meeting. They also shared their joy, and immediately it had a snowball effect. Many others were touched by their joy. They also wanted to be part of it, and about 500 others immediately also signed. So it always starts very small. So this is what the bishops did. I don't believe that the bishops were afraid to meet in this place, but what they wanted is to bring as many as possible together who wanted to celebrate and share their joy, and that's exactly what happened. One of the examples I heard about bishops going back to their respective dioceses is that, of course, of Don Hélder Câmara, one of the leading figures during the meeting in the catacombs, one of the great animators, Don Hélder Câmara. People immediately could not understand what these bishops were doing, like Don Hélder Câmara. But we know today that it took time for people to understand. But they understood. The bishops simply wanted to live a life like Jesus himself. They wanted to live a life following the example of Jesus, treating people the way Jesus was treating people, having time for people, being close to people, and then living a life like Jesus, being a friend, particularly of those at the margins, being a friend, particularly of those at the margins, the poor. So that is what I've heard about Don Hélder Câmara, and we know the story of Don Hélder Câmara having a dream. A dream is always at the beginning that will change others. A dream that inspires others also to dream of a different church. And that is what has happened in many places in South America, where once of a sudden people they did not count started to count. The poor that do not count very often in the eyes of public society, that once of a sudden became part of the church. They shared their gifts and talents, and a church that was dead became alive. This is what has happened in many parts in South America, particularly after the bishops returned. But I believe we can say something about that question, namely the Pact really is about 50 years old. So the key question, I believe, for me too, is the question concerning the impact of the Pact. So we can go back to history. What kind of impact did this Pact really have? Looking at the fact also that many people did not know about the Pact. We know until today that the Second Vatican Council is as important as it was 50 years ago. So the insights, the inspiration that our predecessors got through the Second Vatican Council are important as they were before. That is why also the Pact, summarizing aspects of the Second Vatican Council, are important for us today. So the question is, can a Pact that exists for 50 years have an impact for the time to come? And what kind of impact can the Pact have? For me, that's a key question. The key question, however, goes one question deeper. The question, what does it really mean to change? What motivates us to change? There are people who are challenging us to change. So that's one possibility. We change because people challenge us to change. We do that for good reasons sometimes, that we change. We look at aspects of our lives and realize we cannot continue like this. We cannot continue exploiting our planet the way we are exploiting it. We cannot allow unjust structures to grow because more and more people are being pushed to the margins. There are many reasons why we cannot continue the way we are running our economies, our governments, our church, etc. So when we look today at why we change, we have good reasons. The Pact concretely is a list of good reasons why we should change. It talks about the bishops personally. It goes beyond the leaders of our church. It talks about every Christian. But it is also a message for those outside, because the message is way beyond us as Christians. It addresses us as human beings. It gives us reasons why we should change, to get involved on the national and international level, to look into our structures, political and economic structures that push more and more people to the margins. It's a challenge because we cannot continue like this. Future generations will need a life and have a right to have a life in happiness and peace. The way we have set up our structures, we know, lead to more and more injustice, as well as wars and ethnic conflicts. Our environment, as all of us are painfully aware, is at a state where it's suffering from irreversible damages already. Particularly looking at our peace situation today. Unless something will change in our world, we become more humble, we become simpler in our way of life, we become simpler and less demanding, nothing will change. And that is why this pact is important for everybody beyond our faith tradition, our own Christian faith tradition. What kind of impact will the pact have in the future after being in existence for close to 50 years? I guess that's a dream that more and more people will meditate on it and feel the spirit will get inspired by those who wrote the pact. And then in the end will write their own pact with humankind, their own pact with nature. And for those that are believers, their own pact with God. The message of the pact is do not forget the poor. The poor are important. The poor are a great responsibility for every human being, independent of his or her faith tradition.